In 313, Constantine I issues the Edict of Milan, which grants religious freedom to everyone in the Roman Empire and really opens the door for the spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. Constantine himself converts to Christianity soon after, and the legitimacy of Christianity now necessitates an architecture that can accommodate the communal worship of Christianity. As we saw with early Christian imagery, we don't reinvent the wheel when thinking about the type of architecture that is needed for Christian worship, but rather the early Christians looked to the architecture that had been used by the Romans for a precedent for what kind of architecture could easily accommodate large congregations. So it needed at least three different things. It needed to be able to accommodate large crowds of worshipers. And second, it needed light so they could read the scripture. So it needed some kind of light source. And third, Christian worship was directional. It needed to direct the focus of the worshipers to one side of the church where the Mass was being performed. So it needed one, to accommodate a large group of people. Two, it needed a source of natural light. And three, it needed a clear direction. We see in the early architecture for churches two types of plan that were already in use in the Roman Empire. The first is the basilica plan, which is basically a rectangular plan. And the second is a central plan, which, as you can imagine, is circular and sort of based on the Pantheon. I'm showing you here a reconstruction of one of the first churches built, Old St. Peter's in Rome. And this no longer exists, although we can reconstruct it based on writings and drawings from contemporary scholars. So we have a sense of what the plan looked like. After it was destroyed, it was replaced by the current St. Peter's in the Vatican City. As you can see, it is a rectangular plan, and the plan consists of a couple of main ingredients that will persist through church architecture of the basilica plan. You enter through an atrium, which is an open, colonnaded courtyard. You walk in through a narthex, which is essentially a porched area. And then you walk through a nave, which is a large rectangular aisle in the center of the building. It would be flanked on either side by aisles, which are smaller aisles that allow for flow on each side of the central nave. As you walk through, you have a clear direction because in front of you is an apse, which is essentially a half dome. Some churches later on, and here we see this also in St. Peter's, would have something called a transept, which is an arm that basically crosses through the nave and gives a nice symbolic structure to the plan of the building because, of course, it looks like a crucifix. As Christian churches evolve, the transept will become a more important part of the plan because as more and more people want to attend church, and later in the Middle Ages we will have pilgrims that want to come from far and wide to come to a certain church to see relics or reliquaries that hold important relics of saints and, say, the pieces of the true cross. It allows for a nice flow throughout the building. So instead of just walking through the narthex to get to the church, you could also enter from the sides and not disturb the worship. The height of the nave, and you can see this in the cross section, is the tallest part of the church. The side aisles, the ceilings are much lower, which gives us a series of windows that allow light in. These series of windows on this level are called the clerestory. We've seen a clerestory before when we looked at the Temple of Amun-Re in Egypt. It allows for natural light to flood into a space and light the interior. Old St. Peter's was built by Constantine because he thought that this was the place that St. Peter's was buried. So it operated not just as a church, but also as a burial site. Constantine also felt that it should be commemorated by a large gold statue of St. Peter, so that was placed in the apse. Apparently he didn't understand the problem with idols at this point, but it was just the beginning of public Christianity. By all accounts, it was massive. It could hold 14,000 people and was the largest Christian church until the 11th century. Now, Old St. Peter's is what we call the Basilica plan, and that is because it is based on a Roman prototype of the basilica. I'm showing you here the Forum of Trajan, which you might recognize. The Forum of Trajan essentially has a basilica right through the center of it, which is called the Basilica Oppia. And the Christian Church Basilica plan is essentially a Roman plan that all we do is lop off one of these side apses, and it gives us that directionality that Christianity demands. So we have the lights from the clerestory, a large interior space that can accommodate throngs of people, and if we take off one of these side apses, we have the directionality that a church also demands. In the Roman context, the basilica was used for a variety of functions. It was used for mainly bureaucratic and administrative purposes, but also for gatherings of large people, sometimes debates. But what it allows for essentially is a gathering place that becomes a perfect prototype for the Christian church. Constantine will also look to a centrally planned building for the first churches. Here I'm showing you a plan and section of the Church of Santa Costanza, which started as a mausoleum for his daughter. And we see if we look at the cross section, we also see a colonnade, but this one is circular, and it has a clerestory as well, which allows light in. But obviously in a circular building, the directionality is a little bit more complicated. You'll notice that it does have a narthex, so we know which way to enter, and ostensibly the place where we are focusing would be across from the narthex. And we'll see, especially during the Byzantine era, that this becomes a popular plan for churches as well.